Amen. New morning? Okay. I can still picture it, sitting down for our very first combined 10th and 11th grade ethics class. Our teacher/principal waiting for us as we took our seat, didn't say a word, didn't introduce himself, didn't even take attendance. He just stood at the front of the room, and after a long pause, he asked one question. What is fair? That was it. No warm-up, no context, just that one question. And we're just sitting there like, is this a trick question? People anxiously started tossing out answers. Fair means equal. Fair means everyone gets the same. Fair means getting what you deserve. At the time that felt like the right answer, but what I've learned since then is this. Fairness doesn't always equal justice, and mercy isn't always fair. Sometimes fairness just keeps us stuck in a cycle of keeping score, right? We love scorekeeping. Anyone competitive here? I know we say everyone's a winner, but if you've been on any Little League field, every single kid is keeping track of who scored what, and the parents are also keeping track of who scored what. Even Disneyland rides are built for scorekeeping. Try riding Buzz Lightyear ride or Smuggler's Run with friends. Tell me you're not silently judging the one person who tanked the Millennium Falcon mission by missing their cue. The scorekeeping is baked into our culture. We like knowing who's ahead and who's behind, who owes us, who hurt us, who's in the wrong. But Jesus flips all of that on its head when he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." It's one of the most countercultural things he ever said. Mercy isn't about what's fair, it's about giving what's not deserved and letting go of what someone owes you. And that's what this whole section of Jesus' teaching, the Beatitudes, is really about. The Beatitudes aren't merely a list of ethics. They're not self-improvement goals or a try harder to be a good Christian handbook. They are a description of Jesus' community and a picture of what the good life actually is. Jesus, as he's sharing these blessings, is looking over a crowd of ordinary people, some poor, some mourning, some rejected, some on the margins. And he's saying, you are blessed. The kingdom is for you. In this particular blessing, he's saying, how good is life for those who show mercy? Because mercy is the very thing they'll receive. So when Jesus says, blessed are the merciful, we have to ask, what exactly is mercy? The Greek word here is elios, and it's not just a generic word for kindness or forgiveness. It draws from the two deep Hebrew ideas, hesed, loyal, steadfast love, and hana, grace, unearned favor. Put those together and you get a powerful picture. Mercy is loyal love plus grace. Mercy and grace are like two sides of the same coin. Grace is when God gives us what we don't deserve, like love, salvation, adoption into his family. And mercy is when he withholds what we do deserve, like judgment, condemnation, or the full weight of our sin. It's not just a soft feeling or an emotional impulse. It's love that stays even when it's hard. And grace that gives even when it's undeserved. Mercy doesn't excuse sin, but it absorbs it. That's the kind of mercy Jesus embodies. And that's the kind of mercy that shows up everywhere in the biblical story. One of the places we see it most clearly is Psalms 136. There's a refrain, a beautiful refrain that gets repeated 26 times. Give thanks to the Lord, his love endures forever. His love endures forever. Other translations, his mercy endures forever. Again and again, victories, valleys, in everything, his steadfast love, his mercy endures. That's hesed, loyal, steadfast, never letting go love. And when the writers of the New Testament reached for a Greek word that would carry the weight of hesed, they landed on elios, the very word Jesus uses in Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful. In other words, when Jesus blesses the merciful, he's not just talking about being nice. He's reaching back into the story of Israel, into the worship and memory of the Psalms, and calling us to be people marked by the same kind of enduring, loyal, grace-drenched love that defines God himself. It's as if the whole story of God is set to the rhythm of mercy. And Jesus is saying you're invited into that rhythm. And then if we zoom back to one of the most important moments in the Old Testament. Moses is on the mountain receiving the law, standing face to face with God of Israel. And when God reveals himself and announces his character to Moses, here's what God says. Exodus 34:6-7. The Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast and faithfulness. Steadfast love and faithfulness. That's God's first self-description. Before he says he's powerful, before he says he's just, he says, I'm merciful. It's who he is. And when Jesus shows up in flesh and blood, walking dusty roads, healing broken people, teaching upside down truth, what do people cry out for? Matthew 9:7, 2 blind men shout from the street, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on us. Matthew 15, a Canaanite woman falls at his feet, Lord, have mercy on me. Matthew 17, a desperate father cries out, Lord, have mercy. And every single time, Jesus stops. He sees, he listens and responds. He never turns away. He never says, you again? Mercy is who Jesus is because he is God's loyal love plus grace made human. He doesn't just talk about mercy, he lives it, breathes it, bleeds it, and gives it freely. So when Jesus says, blessed are the merciful, he's not asking you to master a religious skill, he's inviting you to become like him. To embody the same mercy you've already received. Because in the kingdom of God, mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is power. Mercy is justice. Mercy is healing. Mercy is God. You know, it's one thing to talk about mercy in theory. It's another thing entirely to live it out. Right? Mercy sounds beautiful but for us until you actually have someone to forgive. Maybe for you, it was the business partner who cut corners, broke trust, and left you holding the fallout. Or maybe it was a close friend who gossiped behind your back, or a broken engagement when someone who promised forever walked away. Maybe it was a parent who wounded you deeply with words, silence, or absence. See, when those things happen, mercy feels anything but fair. And yet that's where mercy matters most. You know, in Matthew 18, Peter asks Jesus a loaded question. He goes, Lord, how many times should I forgive? 7 times? He thinks he's being generous. And Jesus replies, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, meaning you don't really stop forgiving. Then Jesus tells a story about a servant who was forgiven an impossible debt, something like billions of dollars, and then later went out and choked a guy who owed him lunch money. He had just received mercy, but he couldn't give it. Jesus ends the parable by saying this: shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? You know, this verse gets me. It's hard. I've had to walk through this too. When I was 15 years old, I was abused by someone older than me. I'll spare you the details. I didn't have the words for it at the time. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew something deeply wrong had happened. A couple years after that incident, I saw that person again out of nowhere. And in that moment of shock, looking for some kind of safety, I told a few of my closest friends. But they didn't know how to handle it. I mean, they were just teenagers as well. And so they laughed. I think they thought I was joking, or maybe they just froze. Either way, it left me feeling more alone than before, ashamed, stuck. And so I didn't talk about it again for years. Then when I was 18, during my time in a leadership ministry school, we were doing this exercise, mapping out the timeline of our lives, mapping out moments where we felt God's nearness and moments where we felt his absence. And as I hit that year, as I hit that memory, all the emotions I had buried came flooding back. It hit me like a wave. The confusion, the anger, the betrayal. I couldn't stay in the room. I had to leave. I was furious. So one of my leaders eventually caught up to me, and they sat with me for a while, and eventually, after some processing, led me through a prayer called inner healing. As they guided me, they said, I know this may be hard, but can you picture Jesus in that moment? Where was he? I remember clearly, I was like, yeah, where was he? At first, I didn't want to. I didn't want to put Jesus anywhere near that memory, but slowly, with inviting Jesus in, I could picture it. And what I saw was Jesus weeping. He was grieving with me, grieving for me. And that moment in prayer didn't fix everything, but it was a beautiful moment. It began something, a long, slow journey of healing, counseling, of inner prayer, of naming what happened, and of forgiveness. Forgiveness not just once, not instantly, but over years. As I started, it started as words before feelings. I'd pray, God, I choose to forgive, even when I didn't feel it yet. That's how mercy often begins. Honest, hesitant, slow. And over time, step by step, I forgave. Even for the one who took advantage of me, even for the friends who laughed. You can release someone in forgiveness without restoring full trust. Mercy doesn't ignore the reality of pain or the need for safety. Mercy doesn't mean trust gets built overnight. Forgiveness doesn't always lead to reconciliation. Sometimes it can't, especially when real harm has been done. I had to set boundaries with the person who hurt me. And that relationship is not restored. But I still choose mercy. I still choose to forgive when the memory pops up, not because they deserve it, but because I need freedom. Mercy creates space for healing, not full access. Trust is something else. We can go, that's another sermon. Reconciliation takes two, but mercy starts with one. And that could be you. Mercy still starts with me. I've needed it from others. My friends know it. I need mercy when I failed, and I still need it. I'm not preaching this from a place of arrival. I'm walking this out just like you. And honestly, a lot of mercy in my life has looked like this. Maybe it's like your kid sneaks out and takes the car without permission. You might forgive them, but you're not going to give them the keys again tomorrow. Or if a close friend shares something, you tell them in confidence, you might forgive and let it go, but it'll take time to trust them again. See, mercy doesn't ignore wisdom, it just releases the need for payback. Jesus says in Luke 6:36, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. That's not a command, it's a calling, a healing way of the good life. And it's only possible when we realize we're not the heroes of the story, we're the ones in need of mercy too. Right? Mercy does not come easy. Even when we say all the right things like, I forgive you, I'm fine, it's over, why does it still sting? Why does anger still bubble up? Why does the story keep replaying and replaying in our minds? You know, many of us carry what's called the scorekeeper's disease, a metaphorical term used to describe the idea that the body can keep score of stress and trauma leading to physiological consequences. We're wired to keep track of who did what, who owes us, who hurt us, who's in the wrong. And underneath that impulse to keep score are two things that kill mercy: anger and envy. Anger itself isn't a sin. God gets angry. Jesus flips tables. But it's what we do with our anger that reveals whether it heals or harms. For some of us, anger shows up as resentment, the quiet kind. We don't yell, we don't confront, we just replay the hurt in our heads and build a case. We quietly define people by their worst moment, and that becomes the lens we see every moment through. Resentment, internal scorekeeping, one I struggle with. For others of us, anger becomes rage. Not always loud or violent, but controlling. Rage is what happens when we try to force our version of the story. We vent, we lash out, we try to make people see how bad they hurt us on our terms, in our timing. James says it this way: be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Whether it's resentment or rage, the question we need to ask is, what job have I hired this grudge to do? Is it helping me feel in control? Is it making me feel powerful or pitiful? Is this grudge protecting me from getting hurt again, or is it actually keeping me locked in the past? That's anger. Then there's envy. We don't always get to talk about envy a lot in the church, but it can live in all of us. All the way back, Genesis 4 shows the first murder in the Bible. Cain kills his brother Abel. Why? Because God favored Abel's offering and Cain couldn't handle it. And we go all the way to Luke 22. Right before Jesus goes to the cross, the disciples are still arguing over who's the greatest. At the Lord's Supper, in the presence of Jesus, still keeping score. Envy whispers, you're not enough. Why do they get blessed? Why don't I have what they have? Author Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Anxious Generation, talks about how adolescents deal with envy. Boys, he says, express envy physically, fighting, competing, battling out in their wolf pack. Girls tend to express envy socially through gossip, exclusion, and turning people against each other, not outside, but inside their own wolf pack. Haidt writes, boys maul at each other's bodies, girls maul at each other's reputations. So here's the reality. Most boys grow out of fighting physically, but none of us really outgrow gossip. Gossip is envy's deflection. When we can't handle our shame, we throw it on someone else. It's subtle, it's toxic, and sadly, it lives even in the church. Gossip has no place in God's church, not at Vineyard of Hope. James 2:13 puts it bluntly, judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy is what breaks the judgment cycle. Mercy is what triumphs. Tyler Staton says it like this: it's always up we look with envy, never down with empathy. We typically envy people one step above us, not realizing how rarely we look with compassion at those just one step below. Maybe you rent an apartment and envy your cousin who just bought a condo. But do you ever stop to notice your neighbor who's sleeping in their car down the block? You've got a decent job, but maybe you envy your coworker who just got promoted and is now your boss. But do you pause to consider your friend who's still unemployed and quietly applying everywhere? Maybe you're living with your in-laws and envying your friends who just bought their first home, but do you ever think about the person who wishes they had family close enough to crash with, even if your in-laws accidentally rearrange your bathroom again? Each of these reminds us envy looks up, mercy looks around, and empathy looks down. The truth is both anger and envy are symptoms of the deeper disease. We've forgotten how much mercy we need and how freely Jesus gives it. One of the most famous stories, the prodigal son, in Luke 15, maybe you know the story. A younger son demands his inheritance early, essentially saying to his dad, I wish you were dead. So he takes the money, blows it all in some distant land, and ends up living with pigs, starving, ashamed, alone. And at some point he decides, maybe my dad will take me back. Not as a son, but as a servant. But what we don't often realize is that Jesus' original audience would have known exactly what was coming next. In the ancient world, there was a well-known village ceremony. Oops, that's the wrong one. A well-known village ceremony called kizaza. If a son brought shame to his family and community and dared to return, the village would meet him at the edge of town. They would take their clay pots, the whole village would take their clay pots, and they would smash it on the ground. And they would yell, you are cut off from your people. You do not belong. The broken pot would symbolize the son's broken identity. Shame, disgrace, irredeemable, exiled. And that's exactly what the crowd expected to happen. But in Jesus' story, the father does something unthinkable. The father runs towards his son, risking his own dignity. He embraces the son, absorbing the shame, and the father puts on his son a robe, his signet ring, sandals, and throws him a party. See, the father doesn't break the pot, he restores his son. He runs fast enough and far enough to beat the villagers ready to cut him off. That's what the mercy of Jesus does. Mercy relentlessly chases after you. And maybe you feel broken and unrepairable, but mercy restores your identity in Jesus. Some of you were told explicitly or silently that we were far too gone. You were far too gone, too broken, too unredeemable to turn back, but mercy welcomes you home. Mercy says you are not cut off. No matter how broken you feel or have been, you still belong. That's what mercy does. It's not passive. Mercy is the radical healing power of God's kingdom extended not just to the oppressed, but even to the oppressor. Mercy isn't just something we read in a parable. It still lives and breathes in this world, and it's costly. This past Wednesday, an Israeli embassy official named Yaron Lejinsky was gunned down in Washington, D.C. alongside his girlfriend. What many don't know is that Yaron was a follower of Jesus, not just in belief, but in practice. Yaron was committed to peacemaking between Israelis and Palestinians. He had actually taken part in Musalah's desert reconciliation encounters, where former enemies share meals, stories, and life together in the wilderness. He even sat at the table in the home of Salim Munair, a Palestinian Christian leader, breaking bread together as brothers. Ironically, the very day he was killed, Yaron had just left a meeting to help secure U.S. funding for humanitarian relief in Gaza. The news may not know it or say it, but Yaron's life and death point to something holy. He lived out the upside-down kingdom of God. Mercy wasn't theory for him. It was embodied, publicly, risky, costly. It reminds me of a story Jesus told. Maybe you know it, the Good Samaritan. Someone who crossed enemy lines to show mercy to the one the world said to hate. He lived that story. Not a parable, but in practice. And it reminds us mercy is not weakness. It's the most powerful witness we have. John 20:22-23 says that after the resurrection, Jesus breathed on his disciples and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sin, they are forgiven." The very first assignment the Spirit empowers is mercy. The Spirit of God makes us Christians the people who break shame, not bones, who cancel debt, not people. And how far does that go? All the way to the cross. Luke 23:34, as the nails are driven in and the crowds mock him, Jesus prays on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Mercy in its purest form, absorbing pain and answering with grace. Mercy is not the exception to justice, it's the fulfillment of it. Mercy is not a quick fix, it's not a one-time emotional moment, it's a daily practice. Colossians 3:13 says, "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Notice the phrase, bear with each other. It means let them be where they are, not where you wish they were, and choosing to love them in the middle of their process. And mercy doesn't grow by accident. It grows with intentionality, with courage and time. So what does it actually look like to live this beatitude out, to walk the road of mercy, not just once, but daily? 3 truths that have carried me, and maybe they'll carry you too. Love lays down the scorecard. Forgiveness is the justice that heals. And mercy is the power that moves the kingdom forward. How do we live this out? Start with prayer. Jesus, help me see them the way you see them. That's where it began, and maybe that's where it begins for you too. Start with prayer, bear with each other. Let's bear with one another. Not by ignoring the pain or pretending everything's okay, but by walking with each other in grace, giving space to grow, and even offering that same mercy to ourselves. We're in this together. And I hope you'll bear with me too. I'm still working through this, learning to practice mercy in my friendships, in ministry, and in my own family. Start with prayer, bear with each other, and confess your need for mercy. We don't show mercy from a place of spiritual superiority. We show it because we are desperate for it too. This is the invitation of Jesus. to live not just receiving mercy, but extending it as well.